The Antenna by D.E. Swain. The carriage rattled and swayed, and its sole occupant was annoyed. "I don't see the harm in making some polymers for these bloody iron-shod wheels. You decided to put the dandelions here. It would be trivial to design a productive cultivar," he said. He had been speaking out loud for the last half hour, apparently to himself, and the drover had stopped listening. "I mean, I get it. I do see the harm. But they're doing a great disservice to my backside." The carriage at that moment was transitioning from the cobblestone streets of Birth to the dry dirt roads of its outskirts, and the transition was neither smooth nor subtle. The large wooden chest at the passenger's feet bounced and banged against the carriage floor and against his shins, which earned the chest several loud expletives directed at it. The chest appeared unconcerned at the outburst. The air was warm and threatened to become hot, and held the dust stirred up by the passing of other carriages and carts and rickshaws. The passenger remarked on the grit stinging his eyes, and the taste and texture of it, and the discomfort of his traveling clothes, and a dozen other passing irritants. "I still don't see the need for me to do the work," said the man in the carriage. "I have very important matters to attend to, as you very well know. Guild matters, elder matters. We have plenty of skilled adepts that would be thrilled to leave the Citadel and see the world. I've certainly seen enough of it for one lifetime." He banged his tall wooden staff against the floor of the open carriage to emphasize his point. This seemed to end the one-sided conversation, and the drover, who was normally a very talkative man himself, was grateful for the reprieve as he urged his pair of yoked oxen forward. For the next several hours, the carriage climbed the low slope to the crest of the valley that overlooked the city below and the kilometer-high black glass walls of the citadel behind it. Even at the crest, the drover could not see over the walls, and like most residents of Birth, who were not born into the guilds, he was cautiously curious about the mysteries within. Also, like most residents of the city, he could trace his lineage to Citadel. For his part, the drover, whose name was Orig, not that the passenger had asked, had a grandfather who had left his guild to start a failed business venture in Birth. He had inherited the moss-eaten remains of his grandfather's once yellow guild robes, and the family rumor was that his leaving the guild was less his grandfather's choice, and one more motivated by a guild boot to his backside. Orig's few memories of the man made the rumor seem likely. The carriage continued past the crest and rounded a bend to see 4 or 5 large buildings at the intersection of 3 roads. The largest brick and wood building, pierced with several colorful windows, had a long iron hanger with a wooden placard dangling over its front doors, with the image of a striding man with a walking stick carved and painted into it. The carriage came to a stop beside the doors, and Orig turned to see his fare slumbering ungracefully behind him. "Sir, we're here." The passenger awoke and looked around him, blinking rapidly. Well, it's about time." He sat up and stretched while Orig climbed down from the coach box and tied off the reins to the post beside the building, each ox's head noisily splashing into the water trough beneath. He heard, "How do I get down from this box, then?" as Orig lowered the foot iron and opened the door for his client. "Same ways you got in, I expect, sir. Watch your step there." "Well," Orig noted the slight umbrage on the other's face, and carefully concealed his own small satisfaction. He noted that his passenger, while possessing a very full, very white beard, didn't appear as elderly as might be assumed on closer examination. "I will be needing my luggage." Oh, of course, sir," said Orig, pulling the chest and backpack from the compartment and placing them at his feet, perhaps not as carefully as he might have done for another client. "Not here, inside, man. I know the bottom is caked in dust and mud. He rapped the chest with the butt of his staff after first donning the pack. The chest, which was free of mud and only the faintest trace of dust, was lifted again, and the three made their way into the inn. The interior was dark wood and leather and oiled iron, alight in vivid colors. The day's fading radiance was welcomed inside and died in passing through the tinted windows before settling over tables and chairs and patrons alike. The charm appeared lost on the two men entering the premises, one preoccupied with his ruffled clothing, and the other with the burden of the large chest. Their entrance was not lost on most of the other patrons, however, some of whom glanced in their direction and others who concealed their notice behind a tankard. An energetic collection of soiled linens approached the men, topped with a fraying mane of brown tresses. "Welcome to the— Oh, hello, Orig! Didn't see you there. Sit wherever's. Be back with some potables." The ruffled man hardly took notice, and had adjusted his focus from his clothing to scouring the room's interior. He then strode with great deliberation to a table in the far corner of the inn, which held an empty tankard and the draped arms, torso, and head of a young man, his eyes closed and mouth open. His soft snoring was quickly stuffed out, as the bearded man poked him with the black glass knob at the end of his staff. "Aye, watch it! Artificer Burvis, right." The man sat up, exposing a large wet stain on his gray shirt front. He rubbed his eyes with his soiled knuckles and stretched his back. "Elder Burvis, you will address me as Elder. I can assume all arrangements have been made, and we will be fit to leave on the morrow." It was a statement emphasized by the waving of his glass-tipped staff. "Oh, Elder, is it? Well, then, soonds to me like ye got to toss another round." The man held the tankard up to his face, waving it by the handle to show its lack of liquid. "Indeed. I will concede that I am parched after the day's ride. Where did that Ansela disappear to?" said Burvis, looking past Orig behind him, still carrying the chest. "Sir, I will be taking my leave as soon as payment has been secured," said Orig. Burvis seemed to notice him for the first time. Well, how much for the trip from Berth, then?" "3 auri, and I thank ye for your custom," said Orig, deliberately ignoring the raised eyebrows of the man at the table. Well, just a moment, then," said Burvis, searching his many pockets and withdrawing a clinking cloth sack. He picked out 3 golden discs and passed them to a grinning Orig, who had placed the chest on top of the nearest unoccupied table. "The road could have been less bumpy, and cushions on the seats would be advisable. Good day to you." "And to you, sir," said Orig, who was 6 steps away and himself looking for the absent Ansela. "You know, it took ye for a ride there, Elder." Distracted again by his rumpled purple robes, Burvis sat across from the man. "Yes, of course he did. I certainly didn't walk here." The man paused, shrugged, and waved his tankard at the woman, bringing a similar-looking vessel to a still smiling Orig. "Your beard looks funny," said the little girl to Burvis. "You look funny," he said, looking down at her. "You should go play with your brothers and sisters in the other cart." He frowned at her. "How did you get over here, anyway?" She squinted at him as the wagon turned and sunlight hit her eyes. "I jumped." He looked at the gap between the attached covered wagon, trailing behind his own, and back to the girl. "You never!" She nodded enthusiastically, her tangled blonde hair bobbing along with the movements. I did. I was scared, but I jumped." Burvis let out a harumphing billow of air that ruffled his mustaches, and he lifted his staff from the cushioned seat beside him. "Are you quite certain that you didn't fly?" She took this as an invitation to sit, and climbed onto the bench. "I'm not a bird," she said, as though he had accused her of being something disagreeable. "Birds are not the only animals capable of flight. Perhaps you are a bat." or B? Purvis moved to look behind her shoulders. But perhaps not. I don't see any wings. The little girl giggled and held her hands to her face. You're funny. My beard looks funny, you mean. You're right, of course. I felt the need to grow it when I became elder, but I'm finding it bothersome. He scratched at his face. Although, come to think of it, I do sometimes find an occasional morsel of food from the previous evening's repast buried in there, and it makes for a tasty snack. He smacked his lips. The little girl's eyes grew wide, and then she looked disgusted. Ew! It was at this point that one of the girl's brothers had seen her in Purvis's cart, and was pointing and making excited noises. Purvis rapped the cart wall between himself and the drover with his staff and shouted, Ho, driver! The cart slowed and then stopped, and the drover looked over the wooden sill. What's the fuss, elder? Purvis pointed backwards with his staff, to the scene of the girl's family climbing from their cart to his. There'll be a moment, Stig. He watched her be led away, and responded to the polite and apologetic sounds of the family, and matched the girl's wave goodbye. Discretion, Dell! What if she had been seen? She was not seen. Her velocity was insufficient to cross to this cart, and she would have likely sustained significant injury. I didn't want her to fall either, but now she's going to think she can jump like a grasshopper. She will learn in time that she cannot. Purvis sighed and continued to look at, but not see, the passing farmlands. It was raining heavily when the carts descended the switchback roads into the bowl, and Purvis was denied the view of Fee from the lip, which was something he was very much looking forward to. Progress was slow, as the roadway was muddy and slick, and the carts slid alarmingly often. The carts were also more crowded than Purvis would have preferred, both inside and out. Goats and sheep and more than one cow were tethered to the last cart, and there were loud and unending protests and complaints from those unpaying guests. And inside the carts, the paying guests seemed to have loud and unending complaints in equal measure. Rain would unpredictably but unerringly find its way into the cart, and onto Purvis as well, despite the canvas covering overhead, and his robe was now uncomfortably wetted. But the worst was the smell, from the beefy man sitting on his left, close enough to touch, whose stained jerkin and leather leggings stunk of musty sweat and shit, to the old woman on his right with a sour acrid stench that was ineptly overlaid with a cloying layer of lavender. Every lurch of the wagon sent Purvis to lean on one or the other, and after a full day of this, the passengers were far beyond apologizing for it. For hours, Purvis had been fighting the urge to leap from the wagon into the mud and rain and make his way into Fee by foot. But fight it he did, and after a time the carts left the switchbacks and joined a wider, more solid road, and eventually they rattled onto the cobblestone streets. Purvis stood with relief as the cart slowly stopped, as nearly all of the passengers did, and waited his turn to descend onto the street. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, and he looked up from the looming presence of Fee, that massive, pitted rock, impossibly high, filling his vision. Most of the other passengers were doing the same, and making predictable sounds of wonder at the sight, or pointing to the metal colossi in the distance, or greeting those who had been awaiting their arrival. Purvis turned his attention to the drover, and strode to where he was unloading items from the wagon. Be careful with that chest, Stig. Highly valuable guild property in there. The drover continued to unload items without turning. Aye, elder. Careful with all them things, like. Wouldn't do to be breaking my client's goods, then. Elder Purvis! Purvis turned to see a tall boy in plain purple robes looking at him with wide eyes. I am he. Oh, good, good. I've been sent to fetch you and bring you to the ancillary. His hands were restless and waved in odd directions as he spoke. Despite being taller than Purvis, the bend of his legs and curve of his back made it seem that he was much smaller. Purvis nodded. I see. You can carry my chest, then. That's it over there. Wait here until I settle the account with Stig. He drew his coin purse and turned to the drover, who was wiping his face with a dirty rag. "It's quite the climb, you know," said the woman sitting across from Berbis. He rolled his eyes. "Oh, I'm aware. It wasn't my idea to make the trip to Fee," he said, not intending those exact words. He took a sip of the sour, yeasty beer in his mug that seemed to be favored in the region, and hid his grimace well, he thought. Terrible. "You'll have Lyndon's help to get you and the equipment to the top. He's more capable than he might seem." "The acolyte who led me here?" She nodded. I'll take your word for it. You only dropped the chest twice." He paused, finding himself unable to meet her gaze, and looked instead at the dull metal flagon he held. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Berbis, just fine." She sounded like she meant it, and he hated that. "I like it here. I feel like I can breathe." He didn't want to know what she meant by that. He looked up from his tankard. "But the work can't be as interesting." She laughed. "You'd be surprised. Did you know that there's 100 generations of unmodified germlines here? They're a very close community. The population provides wonderful crossbreeding data." He had no knowledge of genetics, and she knew it. Or rather, he wasn't supposed to know, but she knew that he knew enough. It would never have worked. But seeing her again... "Why don't you come up with me? Out of the bowl, out of Fee. I'm sure the view from the mountaintop is spectacular." He saw the answer in her face as the first words left his mouth, but the remaining words tumbled out regardless. "Oh, Berbis, I don't think that would be a good idea." She shook her head. She was so understanding and sincere. It infuriated him, but he pushed it down as he smiled. "Well, you're probably right. It's above the snow line, and I know how you feel about the cold." He rose from the chair first, which felt like a victory, and left the room as her parting words followed him. "It is cold, isn't it, Elder?" Lyndon had a way of stating the obvious as though it were a revelation. And it was not simply banal. It was exhausting, thought Berbis. He had stopped responding to the remarks and fought to not hear them entirely. "Though I am surely glad of the ox," said Lyndon yet again. "Having to carry all those supplies and your equipment would have been nigh impossible without him. What of you?" He was unreasonably cheerful for a boy who had been hiking steeply uphill for several days and sleeping rough in the wilds of the Bowl lands. Now that they had passed above the snow line, Berbis had even less patience for it, and he pondered instead how long it would take Lyndon to fall down the mountain, and the sounds of his diminishing screams as they echoed up to him from the ground far below. "Follow the contour of the mountain for another kilometer on your current path, until you come to the narrow ridge." An image formed, a white crest of rock trailing the peak, the blue-green sky behind, but also overlaid were things his eyes had never seen. Strange auras and depth to the colors, and nauseating waves flowing through everything he saw. He shook his head to clear it of the sight. "Stop it, I've seen it already." "I apologize if I've given offense, Elder, but I find the view quite spectacular. Do you not?" Berbis sighed. "It's fine. Watch your footing. The snow can be treacherous." They continued until Berbis sighted the ridge in his vision. As he had suspected, they would have significant difficulty scaling it unassisted, and with the ox in tow it would be impossible. "Stop for a moment. Here. Yes. Unload the chest for me," he said to Lyndon, and secured his staff to the ox's bindings. The acolyte's eyes widened, and his face, already overly cheerful, strained to express his eagerness. His fingers fumbled with the ropes around the ox, unintentionally dislodging one of the feed bags in doing so, before the chest tumbled from the ox's back and onto the snow beside them both. "I'm so sorry, Elder. Allow me," said Lyndon, stooping to pick the chest up from the snow and holding it out to Berbis. "Just put it down, boy," said Berbis, removing the glove from his right hand He knelt and brushed snow from the front of the chest. His fingers traced the pattern etched around the large keyhole twice, and after a moment the etching glowed dimly red. A soft click, and Burvis lifted the lid. He reached in and brought out a long length of leather strapping, and he looped it over his head. With both hands he lifted a blocky mass of dark metals and glass. "What is it, Elder?" "He calls it a mass delimiter," said Burvis absently as he moved his hands across the glass surfaces. They glowed to life and displayed colors and shapes that Lyndon couldn't identify. He then felt a deep thrumming in his bones, and the ox would have bolted away had his arms not been entwined in the reins. He urged it to be calm and fought against the jerking, snorting beast. "Hold your breath, you don't want to breathe this in," said Burvis, and the thrumming became suddenly intense and painful to Lyndon, as though his bones were splintering apart inside him, and he heard a deafening, crackling scream that just as suddenly ended. Lyndon turned despite the ox fighting him, and saw a white cloud of smoke or steam occluding the view of the peak. The wind was behind them, and while not strong, it quickly pushed the clouds away, showing a flat section of rock ahead, where before there had been the start of a steep crest. "Well, that worked," said Burvis. It was several hours later when Burvis returned to Lyndon and the ox at the base of the ridge, absent the metal device. "Follow me. We'll camp inside the peak tonight, but put the chest back on the ox first." He seemed very tired and sat on a rock while he watched Lyndon work. The lowering sun gave the remaining light a pink hue, and made long shadows as they ascended what were now crude steps leading up to the peak. The tiers were uneven, not entirely level, and oddly slippery, though no ice had formed on them, and they curved and twisted up the slope. There were several times that Lyndon was certain the ox would not be able to continue upwards, but he was able to cajole and coerce the animal to ascend, until after what seemed like thousands of stairs, but was in fact 237 flights, he saw a lumpy path leading to a perfectly round black hole in the rock wall ahead. Burvis entered first, hiking up his thick robes and cloak as he stepped up, and seemed to disappear into the mountain wall. Approaching the opening, Lyndon saw that he had not, in fact, disappeared, but had walked a dozen paces into a dimly lit tunnel. It was at this point the ox had decided it had had enough, and refused to climb the lip into the dark tunnel, and might have bolted backwards or down the steep sides had Lyndon not let the reins slip and wedged themselves between a boulder and the mountainside. "Hurry up, boy. We need the lantern and my staff," Burvis called. "The ox refuses to come into the tunnel, Elder." "Then bring what we need and leave him at the entrance." Lyndon slid the staff from beneath the bindings and loosed one of the large waxed canvas bags and the lantern, placing them down into the tunnel opening. Seeing that the weight was now uneven on the ox, he took the time to redistribute the remaining bags and chests so that the ox was no longer lopsided. He turned after making sure the reins were secure and that the ox had a good mound of grain to nibble and would be sheltered from the wind, to find the items gone. "Elder?" Of the elder there was no sign, save for perhaps the slightest flicker of light in the darkness. Lyndon stepped into the tunnel. The rounded floor and walls had the same strange slipperiness as the stairs. And there was a smell. No, smells. There were layers of smells to the tunnel. First and most pronounced was the scent of cut rock, acrid and burnt, clogging his nostrils. Underneath that was a musty, damp smell, and a third scent he didn't recognize underlying those, subtle but sharp, something like metal and chlorine. Lyndon's eyes were slow to adjust to the darkness ahead, and he moved forward slowly, cautiously, trying to keep his balance as the walls were beyond his outstretched arms. After a few uncertain steps, he chose to crawl towards the dim light ahead, that flickered orange and grew as his eyes adapted. His hands found a border to the tunnel, a natural lip that extended down. He swung his legs around and found the lip dropped only slightly, perhaps the length of his arm, and he put his feet down on the uneven but generally flat rock beneath. He stood, and could see the light reflected dimly ahead from the walls of what was a narrow, vertical crevasse. The crevasse opened into a large cavern that echoed his footsteps. The lantern Berbus had taken was lit, and sat alone on the ground. Berbus was standing a dozen paces from it, facing a rock wall with his back to Lyndon. He was holding his staff in an odd way, both hands midway up the haft, the black glass tip touching the rock wall, and he was slowly moving the tip up and down the wall. "Elder?" "Be quiet. Don't speak." Lyndon did as he was told, watching Berbus for a time as he continued to move the staff. After that time had passed, he looked around him, seeing an uneven rock floor with the occasional small, pointed stalagmite suggesting a slowly dripping ceiling that he could not see. Crack! The cavern brightened with another light, this one coming from the glass of the staff, bluish-white and glowing brighter. Lyndon also saw a portion of the rock wall had fallen away, revealing a similarly glowing glass interior. "Elder!" "Stay back. He's calibrating now." Lyndon didn't know what that meant, but he suspected it might be better not to ask. While he didn't approach directly, he also didn't see the harm in moving to the side for a better view of what might be happening. As he shifted to the left, so did the entire rock floor under his feet, and he fell onto the hard, cold surface, which continued to shake for several seconds. As Lyndon looked up, a hand reached down. "Let me assist you. I apologize for the oscillation." The voice was neither male nor female, and both it and the hand certainly didn't belong to Berbus. The figure that stood above Lyndon was hard to describe. Lyndon knew they were person-shaped in some sort of loose-fitting robes, but the features of her face shifted in the flickering lights like something seen in a dream. The shape of the jaw, the angle of the eye, the length of brow. And then he was looking at himself. He screamed. "It is an uncommon reaction. My intention was to reduce the anxiety and fear you exhibited." The cavern was warmer now, noticeably so, and both Berbus and Lyndon had found uncomfortable seats on the ground, with their cloaks providing some protection from the still cold rock. The figure that looked like Lyndon sat across from them. "So, you're Citadel? I thought that was a big building in Birth." The other Lyndon smiled, and the first Lyndon was not reassured. Quite the opposite, if truth be told. There was something not quite right about that smile, something missing. "There is a large structure in Birth that is called Citadel, that is true. There is another, similar structure in the void, above this planet as well. Both of these structures generate what you might call my consciousness, in a manner analogous to how your body generates your consciousness." "You have two bodies? But you're also here?" Berbus laughed a bit, though it sounded more like a grunt. "My boy, it might be easier to just accept it than try to understand it. Trust me." The other Lyndon turned to Berbus. "I respectfully disagree, Elder Berbus. If Acolyte Lyndon is curious about my existence, I will answer his questions." Berbus shrugged, and he began to search through the sack that he had brought inside the cavern. The second Lyndon returned to looking at the first. "I have a singular identity, just as you have an identity that you label as singular. However, there is more than one physical edifice that produces my consciousness, as I have said. In addition, my awareness is dissimilar to yours, in that I am aware of all the parts of me that I can communicate with." Lyndon shook his head. "I don't know what you mean." "Consider your own physical structure. You believe yourself a singular organism, but you are aware of your arm and fingers, for instance. Are they you, or a piece of you? You can consider this representation before you as an appendage of my greater self. As well, within you are separate systems and organs that operate together without your being conscious of them. You are not immediately aware of your pancreas, or lymph nodes, for example. But I am continuously aware of and regulate analogous systems within my own structures, and my consciousness extends to even greater granularity. I can consciously control and monitor what for you would be cellular processes. Lyndon's mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what he was hearing. He was not a blue or a green. In fact, he had not chosen his corpus yet, but he was inclined to purple, given his proclivity for mechanisms, and being educated remotely from Citadel and Phi, this may have stunted his learning. And so he had only the slimmest of notions regarding biology and physiology. He knew his body was an immensely complex series of systems like a clock, with gears and springs all working together to measure the time. The gear didn't have to know what the spring was doing in order to function. But what if the gear could choose how many teeth it had? What if the spring could change its own tension? And what if the alloys of the gear and spring could be altered at will? These were the kind of thoughts that pursued him in the quiet moments as he grew old, intruding and prodding him as he tried, in vain, to sleep. This is what you perceive as you look at me, now, a solid figure, singular, similar in appearance to yourself. This is an illusion. I have no skin as you do, I have no internal organs, and the pieces that for you are cells of varying types, for myself, are substantially different, both in functionality and size. Observe. The second Lyndon seemed to evaporate, leaving a wispy, linden-shaped white vapor in his place. The voice that was neither male nor female whispered in his ear, "These pieces can be arranged into myriad forms if I can communicate with them. That is the task assigned to Elder Burvis, to re-establish communication between the relay implanted into this mountain and my propagators." "He means Citadel, Lyndon. This one here and the one up there. They've stopped talking to each other." Burvis had removed a brick of Everbread and a water packet from the pack, and was struggling to open the packet. The second Lyndon reformed, but it now had the sound and appearance of Burvis. "That is not entirely true. There are other functioning relays on this world. There was, however, a loss of consanguinity. Other systems were disrupted as well and are resuming functionality as we speak." Out of habit rather than curiosity, Lyndon asked, "What other systems, Elder? I mean, I will show you soon if you are interested. I now have a question for you. Would you be interested in traveling to Citadel and declaring yourself to a guild? I understand you have aptitudes for process control systems, mathematics, and mechanical engineering. These skills make you potentially suitable for artificer status in Corpus Conculium. Your parents, being guildsfolk, would qualify you for full entry, if Elder Burvis concurs and states his endorsement." Lyndon turned to the first Burvis, who rolled his eyes and then sighed. "Well, I guess this means you'll be carrying that chest back to Citadel rather than me." Another deep rumbling from deep within the mountain. This one starting as a barely felt trembling, then growing in intensity, until both Burvis and Lyndon were thankful to be sitting rather than standing on the lip of the tunnel facing the night sky. A sudden end to it followed almost immediately by an almost deafening roar and a flash of white light that filled the night. They both rubbed their eyes and tried to blink the after-images away, and they watched the streak of white flame rise up, over the top of Phi's snowy heights in the distance, and join the other shining punctures in the black void above them.